Pete Dailey is the mayor of Los Altos and was elected to city council in November of 2022. Pete is a single father living with his two children in South Los Altos. His children, Emma and Raven, have attended our local public schools, Oak Block and Mountain View High. Pete has an undergraduate degree from Berkeley and master's degrees from Pepperdine and Stanford. Don't ask him who he roots for during the big game. He retired from the tech industry over a decade ago, and since retirement, Pete has been an active volunteer in the community, coaching baseball and softball, serving on the boards of Mountain View Los Altos girls softball and Los Altos Mountain View pony baseball, heading up the sports boosters at Block, and serving as Parks and Recreation Commissioner. Pete is also the former board chair and continues to serve as an executive board member for the Lassen Park Foundation, an official partner of the National Park Service. Pete, thanks as always for joining us today.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks to Community Voices for hosting today. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Sounds good. Well, we're going to start off with some questions for Pete, and then, as always, we'll open it up to the audience in a little bit. So, uh, after a hard-fought campaign, you've now been serving on city council for a little over 2 years now. And I'm curious to know how your experience, compares to expectations before serving. And now that you're mayor, how different does that role feel versus just being a plain old vanilla council member? Would love your thoughts.
Thanks, Joe. It's a good question. When I ran, I thought I knew what the critical issues were, and I ran on sort of my platform was sort of a three-legged stool: housing, environment, and city finances, and those are hugely important issues. Uh, but what I was surprised to find out when I knocked on doors is just how much sort of the ebb and flow of everyday life in Los Altos really impacts all of our residents. So what I found was, while my three issues were super important, there was an urgency factor that I didn't consider. And the urgent issues for a lot of Los Altans are, the safety of their children on the way to school, and public safety and traffic circulation and parking and preventing property theft. And I get why those are urgent, and I've learned in more intimate ways, unfortunately, over the last 2 years, uh, just how those issues affect people's lives. So certainly trying to be more empathetic and understanding of some of those things. And then I think the difference between being counselor and mayor, a council member and mayor, for me at least, is that as a council member, I was probably more assertive than I hope to be as a mayor. As a council member, I was, a member of a five-person body, and, trying to convince the public and my peers to sort of get on the same page in some instances, and trying to influence things in the direction that I thought they needed to go. But I feel strongly now that my priority, or my job really, is not necessarily to put my own point of view out in front, but to be a facilitator, and help my colleagues find consensus and help the city move in more of a cooperative fashion, rather than trying to necessarily get my own views to prevail.
Yeah, I think that's a hard balance always to, you probably want to chime in on an issue, yet you're running the meeting, right? And so we're one meeting in with another one coming up. So I'm
Has it only
sure
been one? It feels like six, but that's okay.
I'm sure Jonathan breathed a sigh of relief when you took the baton. So great. Well, we're about a month into 2025, and would love to hear what you view as the three or four biggest challenges facing Los Altos right now.
Well, the biggest challenge is public safety, and this was my colleague Jonathan's priority last year. It remains a priority for me. I haven't listed it as a priority because I feel like it's a table stake, and that you have to have that as sort of job one. no matter what. We don't have the liberty to to make other things higher priorities. Um, and within that, you have the challenge of trying to fund and build a new police station. You have the challenge of trying to fund major deferred maintenance on our fire stations. We will potentially consider creating a fire district and bringing fire services back under the city's umbrella. They've been provided to us by the county on a contract basis for many years now, although they used to be it used to be a city provided service. Costs have gone up. We've got major capital improvements that we have to make to those fire stations. As I said, it's appropriate now to consider the cost benefit analysis and trade-off versus, for having that as a county service versus having it as a city service. So that's the biggest challenge is how we tackle public safety and still sort of walk and chew gum and treat some of our other priorities, the discretionary priorities that we want to tackle. Other challenges. Ego is a challenge in two ways. One, my own ego, trying to put it in check, but two, this is an affluent and successful community, and um, and our residents rightfully feel like sometimes their ideas are perhaps better than what's being discussed, and so they take an assertive, rather unhumble approach to telling those of us in leadership what kind of dumbos we are. So that can be a challenge because I don't react real well to that. So ego is certainly something. Egos are something to balance in this community. Um, other challenges that we have challenges that transcend jurisdictional lines. And the best example is some of the issues that we're dealing with as a community with our schools. And not every resident understands that these jurisdictional lines mean that I can't, or the city council or city manager cannot dictate anything to the schools. We can't tell the high school, hey, you need more parking on campus. Um, we have to operate within our boundaries, but we also have to have, good teamwork and cooperation with these other jurisdictions. So that's an interesting challenge. One that I actually really embrace. My tagline when I ran was "Teamwork makes the dream work," and I still believe that. And I actually think that we're seeing some good results from that approach. I'm certainly getting feedback in outside circles um, that's that's the right approach. Just yesterday, no, I'm sorry, Wednesday, um, I was elected to chair the County Water Commission, which is comprised of, a couple of dozen elected officials from the 16 cities in Santa Clara, as well as county supervisors and people from the uh, Peninsula Open Space and from other, other jurisdictions. So, and I think that that was a reflection of my track record of working with and listening to my peers in other jurisdictions and finding a way forward.
Great. Well, why don't we dive into a few of those? So, obviously, over the recent years, there's been a ton of discussion and debate about the police station. What should we do? Should we renovate? Should we rebuild? Where would it go, et cetera? And also the fire facilities. And, having been in some of those facilities, they're sorely in need of something. And it seems like it's just a ongoing battle to try and figure that out. So how do we make sure we make some progress on that, especially given some of the concerns about, well, if you spend money on X, then you can't spend money on the police station. Would love to hear your thoughts about what you're probably not going to be able to solve it all in the next 11 months, but how do we make some progress in the coming year?
Well, The first thing to do is to make sure that it's at the forefront of our discussions and that it's under our agendas and that we're doing the appropriate staff work and have engaged outside experts. And so I'll talk about the police station first. Uh, you know, just as a placeholder, we might be talking about a $50 million project. Um, I use that as a placeholder because the community center was, supposed to be 35 and ended up a little bit more. That's a few years ago. Costs have gone up. There's probably some more rigorous requirements, although our community center is an emergency operations certified building. And so it meets high standards, but the police station, of course, will have some other requirements. There are a number of different approaches that could be taken to financing a police station. A bond initiative is one example, but even within that topic, there are multiple ways to sort of skin that cat. If it's a bond initiative that's a public safety bond, it has a different threshold for passage versus a general revenue bond. There's differences between whether or not it's put on the ballot by the residents and whether or not it's put on the ballot by the council. That's certainly an option that we've looked at, although I'm not convinced that's the right option. Fortunately, about 75% of the city's revenue comes from property taxes. And we're, privileged to live in a community that has the highest median home value in the country. So, our revenues have been very strong. They've been stronger than we've anticipated, typically. And so, we've been able to not only fund the things that we've budgeted for, but we've found ourselves in the advantageous situation to be able to, try to make up ground on retirement liabilities, try to set aside reserves. We've actually created reserves for public safety and infrastructure. And so our general revenue will certainly help us. And in fact, we have about $15 million in unallocated reserves right now. Uh, and so that provides a lot of flexibility in terms of financing, certainly gives us the buffer to get moving on some of these initiatives without putting the full financing in place. My own preference, and again, this is it's just my preference, and I am no more than one council member in this instance, but my preference would be to start spending some of the unallocated reserve on some of the more critical issues. I particularly think we should probably start tackling some of the remedial maintenance issues on the fire departments. Sadly, the fires in LA have sort of sharpened our focus as they should. But I think it's important that we also show residents just that we're serious about making these investments in public safety. And if we want to go out to the community for whatever financing vehicle we land on for the police station, I would like to also be able to say, look what we've done in the last 6 months. We've already made these investments and reassure the public that the money is being well spent and that we're being good stewards and prioritizing the right things.
Great. So make a little progress maybe on the fire stations and then tee up the larger conversation around police moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we should show some wins, right?
Great. Makes sense. So speaking of the recent LA wildfires, I'm sure we've all been touched in some way by friends or family members who are down in LA and really brought into focus, as you said, that something could happen around here. I think Los Altos Hills was one of three cities identified, along with Pacific Palisades, uh, that where a major wildfire event could happen. So, short of uh, sitting around and doing nothing, like how do we get ready for this in a way that is really going to help us out as Los Altos? I mean, the scenario I imagine is something starts up in the hills, it's a high wind day and it starts coming our direction, right?
Mm,
That would not be completely crazy, although it could go another way.
yeah.
What do we do? What do we do to get ready for this?
So actually, that would be completely crazy, Joe. Because fires don't move in that direction; they move uphill. Heat rises.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's very, very rare that they go downhill. So it's a million times more likely, literally a million times more likely that the fire starts here and consumes Los Altos Hills. So, oh my God, there's a lot of things that need to be done. And I mentioned a few at the council meeting last week or 2 weeks ago, almost a week and a half ago. There are three things that I mentioned right off the bat. And first and foremost, all of us need to do these things. We need to be very careful about the information that we forward and understand that we're in, a very complicated sort of information space with hostile and malign actors using misinformation intentionally, as well as, sort of a lot of ignorant participants just passing that information along. So I encourage everybody to use proper sources, CAL FIRE, Watch Duty, things like that, and just don't pass along rumors. People actually die because of misinformation and disinformation. So that's one of the things that I mentioned. The other thing is smart giving, and I'm glad to see Krista here. Our community foundation is one avenue that we can all choose for sort of responsible giving, and unfortunately, there's a lot of scammers out there. And when you have catastrophes like this, people will try and exploit the situation. And then, last thing, well wishes and expressions of solidarity are well and good, but actions speak a lot louder than words, and we need to take some actions, right? And so, what are those actions? Well, basically, it's an all of society approach. It has to be, right? I think that the threat of wildfire is actually something that should be resourced like the Manhattan Project or the Race to the Moon, frankly. And as a society, we're not doing that. And I can't, nobody here in Los Altos is going to be able to move the whole society in that direction. But there are things that we can do as a community to lead on this. And unfortunately, fire and natural disaster has been a part of my life for a long time. My grandfather fought fires for the Forest Service, and so I learned at his knee a lot about wildland fire. And then, unfortunately, I was involved in a number of other natural disasters over time. Ginny knows about floods in Marysville. We come from the same town. And then in college, we had the Berkeley Hills fire and the FICAP fire, and you know. So here are the things that we need to do. More recently, I've learned through the Dixie Fire, which consumed about 2/3 of Lassen Park, and came very close to destroying the little community where my mountain home is. We became a Firewise community, and everybody who lives there took the individual responsibility to clean up the ground fuel on their property. And those that didn't, first were peer pressured by their neighbors, and secondly, they were cited. And we're doing things like that. We've got a weed abatement program that we're working with the county on, and we actually have a public hearing to address a couple of properties, or at least one property, on the agenda for Tuesday. So, for example, becoming a Firewise community would be particularly helpful. We've had two fires at my mountain home over the last couple of years. I mentioned the Dixie Fire. More recently, this summer, was the Park Fire that started in Chico, and it burned 40 miles straight in a straight line right at my house in 2 or 3 days. And then, thankfully, because of the Firewise efforts of the community, and frankly, because of the previous fires that had destroyed a lot of the ground fuel, the fire was stopped, and CAL FIRE did a great job protecting all of our homes. But our homes were mostly saved because of the Firewise efforts, because we had cleaned up fuel, right? And so when CAL FIRE came in when their structure protection group came in, they didn't have to get rid of a lot of ground fuel. They could run the dozers cutting lines, right? And the other thing that people need to understand and prepare for is evacuation, right? There are multiple stages to evacuation. The first that most people understand is when they get an evacuation warning, right? An evacuation warning means get ready to go. But before that, you need to know what your evacuation routes are. You need to know where you want to go, where you're going to rendezvous with loved ones. You need to know where your important papers are, your cell phone charger, your laptop, things like that. And guess what? You better know what your evacuation zone is. The county is divided into multiple zones, and the warnings and then the orders will come by evacuation zone. So, I think we need to start educating people on on those things. And then lastly, I would say the one reason why I was willing to be the chair of the county water commission is that um, first and foremost, I want to make sure that our hydrants don't run dry. We live in the urban wildland interface, and one of the problems that the Palisades had was that the fire hydrants weren't providing enough water pressure. I don't know that any system could handle a fire of that magnitude, but we certainly need to assess that and begin to build contingency plans and understand what our water system is capable of supporting.
Great. Well, I hope we get a chance to enact some of those activities in the coming months and years. And I know personally, I don't feel fully prepared for what might happen. So would be great to do more in that area.
I
So
would add one more thing real quick,
yeah,
Joe.
please.
Sorry. So next week, I'm actually going to put myself forward for the what's called seat number 7 on our emergency operations council for the county. Seat 7 is a North County seat representing Los Altos Hills, Mountain View, and Palo Alto. And the purpose of the emergency operations council is to ensure that across jurisdictions and across departments, fire, police, sheriff, et cetera, that we, have these plans in place. So making plans is one thing, and then pushing the plans out to the public and the relative stakeholders is another thing. And I want to make sure that we're doing both, that we are planning appropriately. And by the way, I live by a mantra from General and President Eisenhower that I read one of his lectures at West Point, and he said that D-Day wasn't the it wasn't a success because of the plan, it was a success because of the planning. So understanding the dependencies and the interconnections and going through that planning process is incredibly important.
Sounds good.
I
All
see
right.
that Jimmy posted the evacuation zone finder. Thank you. I appreciate
Oh
that.
yeah, I should check that out. All right, so I want to move on to some of the issues around town. So there have been ongoing issues with parking around Los Altos High School, and as you mentioned earlier, it's not as if you can wave a magic wand or mandate something because it's the schools, right? And it's up to them. But maybe there are some things that can be done, and we saw huge turnout. Seems like every time there's a new mayor, some issue comes out of left field to completely derail the agenda and take everybody off. But what can we do to work together to get this parking situation solved in the city?
Well, you can't please everybody all the time, right?
Yep,
And this issue is an issue of both sort of convenience as well as public safety. Uh, the public safety aspects of the issue are critically important, and then the convenience aspects of the issue are somewhere down the list, well down the list. Uh, so the city had to um, make some changes to parking restrictions around Los Altos High School in particular, but we've had parking restrictions around both high schools for years. Um, And I sympathize with the residents who are inconvenienced by the new parking restrictions. Uh, but I have to say that some of the feedback that I've gotten from those residents, that council has gotten from those residents, is indicative of one of the challenges that I mentioned earlier, which is ego. I've literally had residents say, well, we're going to throw you out of office because of these no parking signs. And I've had residents say, you have no right to do this. And what I want to say, and what I've actually said in some cases, because I do email responses to residents sometimes when they make comments in writing. I've had to remind people that it's a public right of way. It's not a privately, these are not privately owned streets. And if they want to have that kind of jurisdiction over their streets, they should go live in a development where they own the streets, because our first obligation is to public safety, right? That said, I do want to hear from them. I want to understand all of the challenges that people are facing and mitigate them as best as possible. We're going to bring parking back at the end of February, and we may consider some additional program modifications. Um, Lots of residents have pushed the idea of a residential parking permit program. I think they don't necessarily understand the complexities of that, and it's not something that we would likely roll out for just a neighborhood or two. It's something that has to be, more or less a citywide program, or certainly more widespread than just the high schools. And so it's not something that can just be implemented, overnight because 10 residents say they want it. A permit program is a possibility. As I said, there's certainly challenges. I don't really favor that anymore, although I used to be more interested in that. I've heard other ideas that I think would be more practicable and probably more appropriate to try at least before going to a permit program. So a simple change, for example, would be, rather than having no parking from either 8 a.m. to noon, or 8 a.m. to 2, or 8 a.m. to 4, as it is on these streets around Los Altos High School. There is actually not uniform restrictions. We could simply say no parking, or 2-hour parking limit or something like that, for example. Although, there's always unintended consequences. And having talked to some students, I went over to Los Altos High School to do an interview with our best paper in town, which is, of course, the Talon. And I observed the behavior of parents and students, and I talked to students. And my guess is that if we went with 2-hour parking restrictions, the students would game the system and they would go out between classes and move their cars. Um, I will note that the worst behavior that I saw was coming from parents. It was absolutely ridiculous. I have a photograph of a parent parked between two signs that say no parking, no stopping anytime. It's actually on a corner, um, you know, and them being there would have prevented, for example, a fire truck from making that turn. So, getting back to the problem of egos, uh, my message to the residents of Los Altos would be: the rules apply to you too. We have a tendency as residents to sometimes think, oh, well, there should be an exception for me, or an exception because my maids can't park on the street because of the parking restrictions. Well, make room in your driveway. It's not the end of the world if your cleaning ladies park in your driveway for an hour.
Yep. All right. Well, complicated issue, and I hope we can make some progress there. Let's turn to downtown. So obviously, a bunch of proposals for various activities downtown, from housing developments, a new theater, new park, and rightly so, some concerns from businesses and property owners around parking and just the impacts of construction and other things. So, would love your thoughts on what's being done there. Where are we in the process? How do we mitigate some of those concerns, et cetera? And I know we could spend a whole hour on this, but we
We
don't have
can.
that
We can
long.
spend more than that too. And this is
Yep.
a topic where we need to get everybody involved. So first and foremost, let me say that, downtown vitality is my mayoral priority. As I mentioned, public safety isn't a discretionary priority. It's a table stake. It's an ante. You don't get in the game unless you're making that, job one. But as far as discretionary priorities, downtown vitality is really the top of my list. And I want to explain at least what that means to me. First, it means that as we grow and as we develop and bring new housing or other projects to downtown, we have to maintain vitality through the construction process, through the planning process. We have to mitigate parking and circulatory challenges. And so I hope that people will understand that downtown vitality is aspirational, and I want to remind everybody that we have to remain vital while we're growing. I go back to the football analogy that I like, which is, you've got to be able to continue to look for receivers down the field while you scramble and avoid the rush. So you got to be able to think strategically and act tactically. That's first. I want everybody to understand that downtown vitality does not mean, hey, we're going to build a theater, and if that means that your business is screwed along the way, tough. That's not what it means. Um, Now I'll transition to some of the projects that have been discussed, and there are different. We should be looking at these projects in different ways. So one of the projects is housing on plazas 7 and 8. So that's going to happen. That's going to happen because we're contractually obligated to do it, because we've already done our surplus land declaration. We're already entertaining, indications of interest from developers, and that will happen. So we will be focused on doing mitigations of lost parking. I don't know how much parking is going to be replaced with the new development. My own preference is to look for parking elsewhere and unburden that development from parking as much as possible. I am a kind of a hardcore housing advocate, so when you start talking about parking and housing, I get my hackles up the way other housing advocates do, because parking has frequently been used as a red herring to block housing developments. So, I'm going to be asking my colleague Jonathan to use his growing influence within the VTA to perhaps help us bring a bus line, so that we can benefit from public transportation in downtown. Everybody will benefit, but potentially the housing developments that we're attempting will benefit further from having less parking required by law. But that means we're going to have to do something else for parking on some of our public property, and that may mean layered parking, meaning build up or build down. We had several folks had advanced the idea of an underground parking lot on Plaza 1 and 2. Certainly building underground is incredibly expensive, and that would be very disruptive to downtown. But it was attractive because of funding sources. However, I think that the city is well enough off that, the ability to use park and lieu funds should not be the only deciding criterion for whether we build on Plaza One or whether we build up or whether we build down. So I actually think that this is going to be kind of an important conversation to bring the stakeholders together. Stakeholders being obviously residents, but downtown business owners, also their customers. I mean, we've got a lot of customers for the downtown businesses that don't live in Los Altos, but they're visitors to Los Altos, and part of our mission is to make Los Altos hospitable, not only to our residents and business owners and employees, but also to these folks who want to come spend their money downtown and in our other commercial districts.
Sounds good.
One more,
For
some few more comments, right? I
oh,
do bring up the theater, right? I have been a proponent of the theater and of the arts for years. And in fact, when Nisa was mayor, she asked me to be on the new theater working group. So philosophically, I support a new theater. As a business person and as an elected official, uh, I am not yet convinced. In fact, it's pretty obvious. We don't yet have a real clear plan and roadmap for how we get to a new theater. So that remains a more aspirational project than certainly the police station and housing on Plazas 7 and 8, because those are critical, and we have much more a much better vision in terms of going forward and what next steps are there. With the theater, I think, we need to bring some more people to the table and have a lot more discussion about, how it's going to be financed and so forth. I continue to think, by the way, that the arts are a wonderful domain for Los Altos. We have some fantastic galleries in downtown. We have our Art and Wine Festival. We have the Los Altos Rotary Fine Art in the Park, and we have Arts Los Altos, bringing murals. We have our Public Art Fund, bringing sculptures to town. And as we look at downtown vitality and we look at sort of the changing nature of our commercial districts, what our districts have seen and what many other commercial districts in Silicon Valley and elsewhere have seen is sort of a changing makeup of, who owns the businesses downtown. And we have had a little bit of a loss of retail and a shift. I love our restaurants, and our restaurant community is fantastic, but I think it would be a detriment to Los Altos if our commercial districts were solely restaurants. We need to continue to be mindful of having the right incentives and environment for multiple types of businesses to operate, to provide the amenities and services that our residents and visitors need, but also vitality itself is based on having that kind of diversity of business community. The lunch customers are in part people who come in from Mountain View or Palo Alto or Cupertino or wherever, but they're also people who work downtown who, just want to walk next door and get something to eat. So you don't have that clientele if all you have are restaurants.
All right. Well, we're right about 9:15, so I think we're gonna just do one last question and then open it up to the audience. So, just want to give you an opportunity for any closing thoughts or remarks. You have the floor.
No, nothing else.
All right. Sounds good. Well, then, why don't we open it up for questions? Please raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. Let me switch over to gallery view so I can see everybody. And I'd ask that you not wait until the last minute and then stick your hand up right before we're about to wrap up. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand now. And thank goodness Gary Hedden, someone put out the bat signal and got him to show up to this meeting. So Gary, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody.
I was
Yeah, I
very
was out.
worried, Gary. I was very worried. I was like, Gary's not here. Something's wrong.
Something was, I was over at Oak School doing the blender bike with Margie Suazo.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, good morning, Mayor. Greentown is going to celebrate Arbor Day on April 25th. It'll be in Lincoln Park. We want to be standing in front of tree number 500. And my question to you is, will you join us and say a few words?
Of course, I'm gonna just multitask real quick and look at my calendar on April
Right.
25th, but unless I'm having a root canal, I'll be there.
Good, good. Glad to hear. No root
We do
canal needed.
have State of the Cities that day.
Do you really? Come
Yes,
on.
so that will be up at the country club in, or Fremont Oaks or Fremont Hills,
That's
rather.
that's a lunch event, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So that'll be
we're gonna get
midday. So go for
we're,
morning or go for afternoon, one or
All
the
we're
other.
right,
going for
you
four
guys
o'clock.
you guys can handle your personal schedules. Was that your question, Gary, or
It
was
was,
that
and I got a resounding yes.
okay?
Thank you.
All right, we'll let you guys figure that out offline if you can make it happen. Any other questions for today? Or there we go. Go ahead, Krista.
Hi guys, thanks so much. This is super helpful, Pete. I'm glad to have been able to be part of this conversation. Naja was formerly usually attending this. Her last day is next week, just so everybody knows in terms of the program officer. The Community Foundation has 3 open positions, so they're posted on our website. Just like to put that out there too. We're looking at hiring some people. So if you want to circulate that. And then I have been meeting with Anthony Carnesecca, just as an update as we're talking through the splash pad. And you guys are sorting out the location for the downtown park and sort of space for that and how we can do that as we have promised that funding. And I just wanted to celebrate, well, 2 things. One, I wanted to celebrate that Greentown, Resilient Los Altos, LACC, they're all nonprofit incubated projects by the Community Foundation. So yay, us, look at all this civic participation on board here. That being said, we're also doing a reboot of LEAD, and we're having the chamber own that. So I wanted to just give that update to everyone. The Community Foundation will sponsor it, and the city is also committed to sponsoring it. But the chamber is looking to own it and launch it, so you guys can all peer pressure Kim Mosley and Nicole as you see fit at getting it rolling. But I think tentatively they're talking about March start date. Probably is going to be more like April, but we'll see. But that was the conversation going out there. And then Pete, I wanted in kind of a Gary sort of thing, I do want to circle up. I'm part of this Los Altos Hills Fire Coalition. I went to their commission meeting last week, and we're starting to have a meeting. Resilient Los Altos is part of that as well. Manzanita Works is also wanting to be part of it. So I'm just thinking if there are other players, and it sounds like I didn't realize you had so much background in fire, that you should be part of that collaboration too, as we're starting to think through how to be, protective of the hills. County Fire is really leading it.
Yeah, I absolutely want to be part of that discussion, and bring some of the other discussions probably that I've been involved in together, right? Because this will be an exercise in with lots of moving parts, right?
Yeah, I think I didn't really realize that to the degree that you were involved in already too. So it feels like both communities need to have the joint conversations. So yeah, we'll
Yeah,
try to orchestrate that.
definitely. One of the things that I will bring my what little political capital I have to bear on. It's been my observation when you watch intergovernment or interagency efforts to fight fire, and we during the Dixie Fire, the Lassen Park Foundation evacuated the Lassen Park headquarters and used one of our commercial buildings that one of our board members owns to create temporary headquarters, and it was an interagency sort of war room, and the task force met every Friday for status review, and that was National Park Service, Cal Fire, Forest Service, and all of the local county and municipal fire departments through mutual aid. My observation is you have to have people who are willing to lose their jobs to fight natural disasters. The park superintendent chose to masticate and get rid of ground fuel in the park. If anybody understands the culture of the Department of Interior and the National Park Service, they'll understand also why my friend Jim is no longer the superintendent at Lassen Park after making that choice. Guess what? That choice saved several communities. So as political leaders, we can use what little political capital we have to shield people who are willing to go out on a limb and cut through bureaucracy or move against their organization's culture to get stuff done. there is no time for jurisdictional pissing contests in natural disaster.
All right. If you have a question, please raise your hand now so we can sort of moderate. And Bill, go ahead.
Hi, Mayor. I want to share my appreciation for the expertise and passion which you're bringing in your role for our city. The one of the items on the agenda that's being looked at is whether Los Altos should become a charter city. If that were to happen, then that would open up the possibility of ranked choice voting. I'm curious as to your thoughts regarding implementing that.
So thanks, Bill. We had an interesting discussion from the dais about the different aspects of becoming a charter city and what it might, what the sort of opportunities and threats would be. And we've asked staff to do a more thorough SWOT analysis. The dais was somewhat split in terms of ranked choice voting as a reason to consider becoming a charter city. And there was a clear majority that wanted to look at a charter as a means of implementing a real property transfer tax or increasing our real property transfer tax. We have what could be considered a real property transfer tax, but it's a document tax or document fee, and I will defer to my real estate attorney colleague on council, or perhaps our director for planning to correct my characterization of the existing fees that we have. But the consensus last week was to focus on that funding mechanism for public safety and other general requirements as our sort of primary reason for looking at a charter right now. It isn't clear to me, sorry, it's not clear to me that ranked choice voting would be a good thing for this community. If we were sure that ranked choice voting could get us out of going to districts, then maybe I would feel differently about it. But it's still fundamentally at-large voting, so it's not covered by the safe harbor in the California Voter Rights Act. And we have already gone to districts. We have already undergone the sort of demographic analysis and the mapping and the engagement with the community. And so that's where we are. We're going to, hold district elections in 2026, regardless of whether or not we become a charter city and even if we adopted ranked choice voting, we would still be voting in district elections in 26. So I don't think that there's enough traction behind ranked choice voting right now to make that a real compelling part of the charter analysis. It seems like we're more interested right now in looking at it as a means of funding the police station or other general requirements. And that also might mean that it could be a very limited charter. There's been discussion, for example, of taking the approach that our charter might be a one-page charter, and it might say something as simple as Los Altos will act as a general law city in all respects except for real property transfer tax. We'll see how it goes, but these are sort of the issues that we're chewing on.
Great, thank you.
All right. Well, seeing no other questions, I'm going to try and get us out of here on time. So, Pete, thank you so much for the great conversation and answers to the questions. Our next meeting is going to be on Friday, February 7th from 8:30 to 9:30 as always. Please join us for a discussion entitled Downtown Parking Strategy with Nick Zorns, Assistant City Manager, City of Los Altos. If you'd like to be on the LACC mailing list, please send an email to info@losaltoscommunitycoalition.org. Email is posted in the chat. And big thank you, as always, to the Los Altos Mountain View Community Foundation for providing LACC with financial and in-kind support. So thanks once again, Pete. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.